And good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to my webinar, Getting in Front of the RFP, How to Stop Transactional Thinking from Diluting Your Value. Thank you for everybody for joining us today. We've had some great feedback already on this topic. This is, many of you know that we've done this webinar before, but I'm constantly updating these things and trying to make them more relevant and tighter. And so this is no exception. Very excited to present this today. So thank you for joining me. Before we get anywhere, we have to thank our sponsors because sponsors are part of what makes this possible. We've got AV Franklin, formerly AV Stummful USA, and HireTrack, Flex, Lasso, Nationwide Video, and Square AV have all become AV Matters sponsors for the rest of the year. So thank you guys for your participation. And all of you, please take time to learn about these companies and patronize them if you can. I am your presenter, Tom Stimson. I'm president of the Stimson Group. I am a business consultant. I'm in the AV industry and have been for apparently 35 years. And that sometimes makes me an expert on things, but even if I'm not, I'm going to present anyway. Feel free to send me questions, tom@trstimson.com. Check out my website. Join us on Facebook, all that kind of good stuff. Love to keep the conversation going. You guys know, many of you are repeat attendees, how much I love to talk about this stuff. So the question I have is for you is, have you ever wondered why your company can't grow, or why if it does grow, it doesn't stay grown, that you go up and you go down? Do you wonder why some leads don't amount to anything? Do you wonder why so many customers seem to focus on price? Have you tried this partnering thing? Have you tried to get people to partner with you and explain to them the importance of a partnering relationship and you're not getting any traction there? Okay. These are all valid questions and these are all valid concerns. And it tells me one thing, that you're trying the right thing. You're trying to do the things that you need to do for your business, but they don't always work. And this one webinar is not going to solve all of those problems, but it's going to address an important issue about growth and how you get business. And that is that life doesn't begin at the RFP. So the request for proposal, that lifeblood of our business, those things that you know, I'll date myself. Back in the day, it was the fax machine. I could be sitting in my office, I would hear the fax machine go off, and the only reason for us to get a fax was that's the way that RFPs came in. So I became top salesman in the company, and there was only two of us, because I could get to the fax machine faster than my boss did, and he was happy to have me write proposals. So life doesn't begin at the RFP anymore. The RFP is something different. So we're going to talk about what an RFP is today and what we need to do about it. That's going to lead into the discussion about selling outcomes instead of selling transactions. An RFP is for transactions, and that's what most of you are trying to get away from. So we'll talk about how those are connected, which means that we have to spend a little time talking about marketing, branding, and lead generation, which is like, really, what's that have to do with sales? Well, gosh, guys, it has everything to do with it, and we need to talk about that. And we'll spend a few moments talking about marketing strategies so that we can tie all of this together. Because if you want life to begin before the RFP, then you're going to need to understand all of these other things as well. So here's the premise. If you offer a transaction, follow with me here. If you offer somebody a transaction, you're asking them to stop considering your brand. In other words, the branding discussion is over. The assessment of your value is over. They're simply going to consider the transaction. Do I want to pay this? Do I not want to pay this? In other words, all the marketing is now done because we have a transaction in front of us. So when you offer that transaction, you're asking them to change what they're thinking about. So transactions can be valuable. They are trigger points. They are pivots, but they may not be the pivot that you're looking for. If you're selling outcomes, that outcome-based selling will transcend transactional buying. You have to believe that, or everything else I'm going to say is not going to make any sense. If you sell the end result instead of selling the plan, and your buyer understands that and buys into the outcome or the end result, then they don't need the transaction anymore. What they're now buying is the outcome, and that will transcend the transaction itself. And the third thing that I need you to start understanding with this is that RFPs are not the goal. Back when I started selling, they were. That's all we wanted. We just wanted somebody to send us an RFP so we could act on it. Okay. Today, if we're waiting on RFPs, okay, then we have some brand business and business development and even sales failure. Okay. RFPs are a sign that we haven't done our job. Matter of fact, in the ideal world, you would never get an RFP. You would sit down with the customer, determine what their needs are, what their budget is, and what they can do for that, and then you would fulfill. Okay, the fact that there's an RFP means that somehow the client has chosen to bypass your process for getting them the best results. And you have to ask yourself, hey, why are we skipping over that? It's really, really important. So here's a quick exercise to talk about, what your focus is and what your brand is and how they work together. I use this sometimes as a diagnostic tool. If I have a client that's a proposal mill and they're just cranking out proposals and they have bad close rate and everything, I am reasonably sure that they have some brand issues and that they are very product focused. In other words, they're inherently transactional. And they're probably working hard to get RFPs and they're succeeding at it. And so they're writing a lot of proposals. But as a seller becomes more and more customer focused, okay, even if they don't change their brand, they get out of proposal mill and they start dealing with customers' issues. And if their customers are typically indifferent, in other words, they buy from them one time, but they don't buy from them the next, and nothing you seem to propose makes a difference, okay, that means your brand is probably weak. So you're paying attention to the customer. It's not having an impact. My suspicion is that you have a brand problem. But if your brand is strong, but you're really product focused, then the customer is constantly scrutinizing the value of the transaction and go, hey, you guys play really well. You look really good at what you do. You have a great website. You talk a great talk. Your proposal was beautiful. But all you did was talk about your product and you price things transactionally, and I was really looking for a better experience. So product focused and a strong brand is probably going to leave the client wanting something better. But if you've got a strong brand and your customer focus, what we find is customers tend to want more from you. They come back to you and say, well, can you also do this? And they start asking you to do things that maybe is not on your product and services list. They start asking you if you could take over parts of their projects that other companies were doing that may not actually be in your wheelhouse. And what a fantastic position to be in. So your brand and your market focus and your customer focus are very, very important in all of this. And if we have a weak brand, we have some real good arguments for strengthening it. And if we're product focused, we have a real good argument for making ourselves a little bit more customer focused and start talking about things from the customer point of view. So my ideal world is that you have a well-developed brand and you invest the time to market it and use business development to spread the gospel of your brand. At the same time, you're talking from the customer's point of view. You're using customer language to relate what you do in their terms. And these are very important things, but that's the ideal world if you want to grow and prosper. All right, we already have a question coming in here. This is great, thank you. And in a case where there's an RFP, would you find it better to focus on how your company would adhere to their company association objectives to separate yourself? So that's a question that we're going to kind of answer over the webinar. That is the right question. When you do get an RFP, because they've bypassed another process, what is it you're going to do about it? And we'll talk about that right at the end of the webinar. The last section is, what do you do if it happens anyway? All right, so thanks for asking that. So let's talk about why an RFP is too late. So the theory that this is how it all works, the customer determines that they want something. They have this great idea, and they want to sit down with you and design how their needs will be turned into implementation. In other words, there's a conversation going on, and then they develop a budget with your advice and input. And then we go out and we hire the subcontractors to do the little pieces of work that we can subcontract. I mean, that's the theory of how things work. But what really happens is Stakeholders come up with ideas. They take their wants and they draw lines in the sand. They go out and they hire some experts to protect them from subcontractors. They work with contractors to take their budget and make it do more. That's the value engineering part. And then the outcome of all of that is an RFP. And what we get when we're getting an RFP, we are so far down the food chain of value engineering, expertise input, and stakeholder ideation that there's really nothing left to do but field a transaction. So an RFP, all the value is gone by the time you get an RFP, and that's the problem. So you can't sell outcomes if all you see is an RFP, because the outcomes have been defined in the customer's mind, in the buyer's mind, and the fulfillment is what you see in the RFP. So an RFP is formed after all the value is engineered from the project. An RFP exists to create that level playing field so that they can get the best price without having somebody redefine what it is they're actually asking for. So an RFP can be a good thing if somebody's gone through the trouble of thinking it out and tailoring it for you, but that's not where you make the money. You make money on delivering something that's better than what they asked for. So if I want to sell an outcome, if I want to sell a wonderful audience experience, for instance, which is an outcome, and all I have is, here's how I want you to do it. I want you to put 2 speakers here, and I want you to put a screen here. Okay? I can't deliver that outcome if I'm working just from an RFP. So here's the ideal process that we're looking for. When the customer wants something, we want them to call you. That's it. That's the ideal process. How do we have a relationship with the customer? And that's what you're looking for, is that relationship, right? We want a partner. I want you to call me, and we'll go through the ideation process. We'll go through the needs definition, and I'm going to make sure that you understand what my brand represents, how we do things, where our credibility is. I need all of these marketing things in place in order to have the credibility that says you're just going to call me. Because without that, I don't have clarity, I don't have the understanding that we can do a good job, and I don't have the trust and the rapport with a client that allows us to have that relationship. So for all of you people that want a relationship, an RFP is a sign that you have failed. The ideal process is the client calls you. That's how it starts. It's not an RFP. So the topic today is, how do we get in front of an RFP? How do we get ahead of this process? How do we position ourselves to be the people that get called? Well, this is going to sound surprisingly simple and oversimplified. We have to engage prospects before they need or want to buy. We need to be having a conversation with them on a regular basis that has nothing to do with a project, because the need hasn't been created yet. There's no stakeholder demand for a project. So lead generation is about identifying ideal targets and engaging them in brand conversations. Notice I didn't say sales conversations. We're not going to process an RFP. Again, RFP is a sign that we have failed at these other things. So the entire process of getting in front of an RFP bypasses or predates the traditional sales process. Getting in front of the RFP is a marketing process. Now, you can use people whose title are sales to do some of these things. That's a different discussion. Matter of fact, I think that's what I sent a blog post out on my mailing list today on that very subject, that just because somebody has a title doesn't mean that they can't do other things as well. So lead development is a process. Business development is a process. So business development is the extension, is the human form or the personification of marketing and branding. So if marketing and branding is my website, my promotions, my advertisements, my logo, how my trucks are wrapped, all that kind of good stuff, my stories, my social media, if that's my marketing and branding, business development is the person or the individual who brings the human form of that to potential buyers. Sales is therefore the representative of the delivery or the transaction of the process. Okay, we process the opportunity, we budget it, we close the deal, we maintain the relationship, and it once again becomes a business development and marketing exercise. So to get in front of the RFP, I've got to do stuff that engages the client all the time. Which brings us into what's the role of marketing and branding in all of this. Because I can't talk about getting in front of the RFP without talking about marketing and branding. So there's no magic pill that says, boom, the client's going to skip the RFP process. We have to do a lot of things on a lot of fronts in order to earn the trust, the rapport, and the credibility to allow that process to happen. So number one, marketing. I always like to say that marketing softens the beach. Marketing is what gets out there and makes you known to people who you are not known to. In other words, the first time you meet somebody, the first time you go to a networking event and shake somebody's hand, okay, they should already know something about you. And what they know about you is probably your brand. So whatever your brand represents is all they know. But they need to start somewhere because marketing can be working in the background all the time. Lead generation is a process within marketing. Okay, and we use promotionals and things like that to drive lead generation, get people to share their contact information with us, which is what makes them a lead, so that we can follow up on it in some form or fashion. A lead could become a prospect, and a prospect is basically a qualified lead, a lead that's well qualified and has expressed interest in doing business with you in some fashion in the future, becomes a prospect. And marketing can take a lead to a prospect level. Business development is what takes a prospect to an opportunity level. It's that getting in front of the RFP exercise, is staying with the client, understanding their needs, anticipating the upcoming events or projects, and making sure that we are there, we're who gets called when those thoughts start to happen. That's the role of business development. The role of sales is once that opportunity is formed to follow through on the transactional side of the opportunity. How do we build a proposal? How do we build a budget? How do we negotiate terms and conditions? How do we make sure that the project is delivered successfully? Okay. So it's a progression. And where most of us struggle is that we want salespeople to do the business development role. Actually, we want them to do the lead generation and prospect development role as well. And honestly, it doesn't work. We can ask for that all we want. But those are processes that are generally outside of the skill set and the time constraints of being a salesperson in a project-based world, which is what most of you are in. So if we're going to market, and our goal is to sell outcomes rather than transactions, then we market a little bit differently. It's not just advertising. If I'm selling a transaction, I can advertise. The transaction's a product. I can put parameters on it. I can define it. I can put packaging on it. I can put a bow on it. And it's much easier to market that through advertising. Make people aware of it. Here's the benefits of it. Buy this thing. When we're selling outcomes, we're in the service world. So we're dealing with services. And if I'm going to sell outcomes, the first thing I have to do is create attraction. At the minimum, I need to be attractive. Okay. I also have to establish credibility. So one, I need to look interesting. I need to look smart. I need to look viable. But then I also need to become credible. So, hey, it's like saying, hey, that person looks really sharp and intelligent, but when they start speaking, they are not. Okay. That's who we are as companies. We have to attract people to us. We need to be able to, they need to see the potential value in our brand image, but then we need to actually engage with them at some level and prove that we are smart, credible resources within this second segment. So if I become credible, then I have the opportunity to capture leads and then subsequently engage leads. So if I can drive people, for instance, to my website where they say, oh, here's a forward-looking company in this space. And oh my, here's an interesting article. Here's some case studies. Here's some photographs that tells me that they're pretty good at what they do. And then now here is an invitation to receive something that might be valuable to me, attendance at a workshop, a webinar that will help me in my job, a white paper that will be valuable to my company, something that is, because you're credible, I can perceive that as being valuable to me as a buyer in my career. So this is taking our knowledge and putting it in customer terms. A lot of what I see people try to do is they try to establish credibility by trying to look really smart at their job. Talking about products, talking about what this widget does, talking about the best way to do this thing or that. What is more valuable and more credible to the buyer or your potential customer, is talking about things that are important to them, things that are going to make them look better in their world. So that's how we capture and engage leads. And once I have them captured and I can further engage with them by offering them other product, and we've identified what's important to them, I now have the opportunity to have a conversation with them. So this is now a well-qualified lead that I'm going to turn over to business development or use more effective digital marketing to turn them into a prospect or determine whether or not they are a prospect. And if they're a prospect, they will have a brand conversation. They need to understand what it is that I do in brand terms that I'm providing for them. They need to understand what I stand for as a service provider in order to engage even more deeply. So I'm going to pause here. I think I got one more bullet point. And then once I have them engaged in that conversation and we've done the capabilities, we've explained who we are, why we're valuable, how we work with organizations like theirs, then we can actually start to explore their needs. And it may not be a need for a project they have today. In other words, I'm not trying to write an RFP or get them to send me the RFP. I want to explore what their needs are in general terms. Okay. When you have a successful project, what does that look like? What are things that frustrate you about doing projects the kind that we do? Those sorts of things. All right, I'm pause here for a question. I said a good question that says, I'm somewhat cautious when I receive an RFP. I find they do not clearly state the scope of the job. And thoughts? And I said, yeah, some do and some don't. I mean, certainly there are three types of RFPs I find. There's the request for information, which is generally very vague, and they're inviting you to basically do a capabilities pitch and a proposal for something that's all over the map. We have a process for doing that. Matter of fact, that is next month's webinar, Ideation and Outcome-Based Selling. So there's a request for information. There's the tight RFP, which is they've engaged experts to try and tell them what to ask for in order to level the playing field and take the value out of it. And then the third type are the vague, the not clearly stated scope of work. And I look at those as a personal challenge to engage with the buyer to do what should have done before. So I love getting a not clearly stated scope of job. So my thought on that is that's a great opportunity, because one of two things are going to happen. They're going to let me help them create clarity, or they're going to reject the assistance, in which case I know they are not a qualified lead and I'm done with it. So when I get an RFP and I'm going to process an RFP, I want to get to a no as quickly as possible. And if I can identify a good reason not to go after this RFP, the earlier I do that, the better. I'm not wasting resources in a bidding war for a piece of work that's not well defined. But very often you'll find that people put out vague RFPs because they're trying to find somebody who will help them. So let's take that opportunity if we can. So I hope that answered your question. So here's one of my favorite slides, and if you've heard me go through this before, I apologize, but it's better every time I do it, and this will be no exception. I'm going to show you what this is called the brand accelerant curve, and I didn't invent this. I've adapted this from my consulting mentor, Alan Weiss, who adapted it from somebody else. So it's had a lot of iterations. We have three qualities that we express. We have products and services. Some are just competitive. Those are the transactional things. Some are distinct. They're unique to us. And some are breakthrough. In other words, they're very valuable to customers, often the outcome-based selling stuff we're talking about. We also have barriers to entry in interacting with us. The lowest barrier to entry we have is generally our website. Anybody can get to your website. They just need a URL, or they ought to be able to find it without too much trouble. But websites are also not very intimate. So they have very little intimacy and actually very little value to the customer. It's just informational. So a website in and of itself is somewhat competitive in terms of that it can place you in the market, but it doesn't have much engagement between you and the customer. And as we move across from left to right, we have offerings that are more and more intimate and have higher and higher value for the potential customer. But the barriers to entry become higher and higher as we move across. So it looks like this, and this is what we call the brand curve. So my low barrier to entry and low intimacy is in the top left. That's probably my website. And my highest barrier to entry, but my most value and the most intimacy is way over on my breakthrough of products and services on the far right hand. So some things that are competitive for many of our businesses, and it's important that we have all of these things, by the way, because as I'll show you at the end of this, we want to help them move down the curve. So a good website will hopefully establish some credibility and invite them to partake of something like free content or maybe an online experience. So you sign up for a newsletter, maybe you join a webinar. Right now, all of you are on my accelerant curve under the competitive mode. You're in a free webinar, which is hopefully valuable to you. You probably get my newsletter, which is how you found out about it. And hopefully that means you've been to my website. So we've done some very non-intimate things together that hopefully have some value for you. And that might lead up to something like an in-person event. It could be an open house. It could be a small workshop or a free workshop or a keynote speech, something like that in your space. Now, as they move down the curve, if they've done some of these things, then they're going to be much more comfortable and much more likely to partake of a distinct offering from you, such as a transaction. They might actually do some business with you, engage you in a project. Your projects become more and more intimate when you start adding things like content and creative and design to them. So these are higher barriers to entry, but they're much more intimate and they're much more valuable. You'll also notice that the profit margin seems to also move, increasing from left to right through all of this. And then you get down to the end and you're selling some sort of an outcome. This is your breakthrough product. This is the thing that makes you stand out, head and shoulders above your competition. That's the highest value, probably the highest return thing that you do. It's also a very high value and intimate thing for the customer to engage with. But they had to engage. In other words, the barrier to entry is the engagement and the cost for them to participate and receive that benefit. Now, in the ideal world, we're kind of bouncing clients down this. They will follow the path they want to follow. Trust me, you can't make them follow any single path. Sometimes they will look at your website and they'll immediately hire you for a project, or they will spend a lot of time bouncing around and free in-person events and coming to your barbecues and before they ever buy from you. Now, in terms of what we're doing here, if we're over in the competitive space, we're really working on establishing credibility. So that's one of the criteria for getting in front of the RFP is that you have to establish credibility. Then you have to be able to get people to engage. So getting in front of the RFP is also getting them to engage with you. So in my marketing efforts, I'm creating opportunities for engagement. Okay. And then stickiness is if I get to do some work with someone, and many of you tell me that once you've done work with a client, they stick with you. Okay. That's what we're looking for. So if I can get them to stick with us, that's great. But the thing is, people don't always stick at an outcome-based sale. What's nice about this brand curve is because I have content and projects and transactions and in-person events behind it, the client can hire us for an outcome-based event. We go in and we do our best work, but they don't have any more of that in the near future. But in the meantime, they go back to giving you small projects. They go back to giving you important projects. They participate in your online experiences. They stay in touch with you through all of that. In other words, you keep them engaged so that when they have another outcome-based project, you're who they come to. Okay? So the marketing and branding becomes very important in this process of getting in front of the RFP, because we have to create a lot of potential engagement points, because we don't know What's going to create the trust and connect the buyer to the branding? Only they know. So you have to have as many practical touch points on the brand accelerant curve as you can have too many. Trust me, I've tried it, but you can certainly have too few. So you design this based on what your customer profile is. And one of the greatest things about this is if you have this set up and it's working, sometimes people will come in and they will root around and learn about you over on the left-hand side of the curve, and then just out of nowhere come to you with the best piece of business you've ever heard of. They'll go straight from the left all the way over to the right, and they'll become your best customer. And you didn't have to do a lot of heavy lifting to get there. Your marketing and branding did the work for you, and they skipped the whole business development process and went straight to buying from you at a very high level. And that's the ideal world. And it won't happen if you don't do the kinds of things that trigger that sort of behavior. So if I'm going to start with creating brand attraction, then I have to also establish credibility, which is continually demonstrating your market leadership. You guys see me do it all the time. I have market leadership in the consulting world. You can have market leadership in your world as well. You just have to publish. You just have to do the work. You need to do persistent, useful content. You need to focus on what your ideal buyers face, because that's what's valuable to them. Don't write about what's important to you. Don't promote what's important to you. Look at things that are important to them that affect their world. Don't always swing for the fences. In other words, hey, we put out a newsletter and my business didn't grow. Okay, yeah, you're not going to grow your business with one newsletter. The fact that sometimes things like that happen. Hey, we sent out an email and I immediately got a response back and we got a big job. Great. I'm glad that happened for you. But don't always swing for the fences. Don't always expect those things to happen. Sometimes you need the base hits. Sometimes you just need to let the small ideas grow into big ones. And I would take 20 base hits over 5 home runs anytime. Now, we have to capture and generate leads, because as I have people working on the left-hand side of the curve, if I don't capture them, I'm going to have a hard time moving them towards the right. Because if I capture them, then I can talk to them in a different way. So an uncaptured lead is somebody who comes in and looks at your website, goes, oh, they'd be good people to do business with, but they never tell you that. Okay. All right, so that's a lost opportunity in my book. So we've got to capture those leads, and we also have to generate leads. In other words, we have to drive people to our website through other means, and that's what marketing does. So passively, I can collect contact data for a mailing list. Okay, I'm capturing them on the left-hand side of the accelerant curve. Actively, I can get involved by creating lead magnets and promotions and doing social media promotions that drive them back to my website and share higher value content with them, capture them at a higher level where I can actually put a keyword on them that says, hey, I'm not interested in just your newsletter. I'm interested in this white paper that you wrote on how to create better experiences in a live event space. Okay, that up the level of qualification I have about you as a customer. So that's active identification. And then the proactive identification is identifying target people who have these keywords on them and reaching out and engaging with them. And that's coming at them with even something at a higher level that says, hey, Tom, I see you downloaded this article about audience engagement. I'd love to know what you think about it. And then I'd also like to know if you'd be interested in this other product that we have that I'd be happy to share with you for free if you'll just come by the office and let us do a capabilities pitch for you. That sort of thing. So you pick the best prospects, you turn them over to business development to see if you can get an even higher level of engagement. And then when I do have them and I do get them across the threshold, or I go visit them or whatever it turns out to be, then I can have a brand conversation. And brand is the value of your company as perceived by the customer. It goes way beyond what your products or services are, and it's everything to do with what people perceive you bring to the marketplace. So it's not always what you do, but it's why you do it. And the best brand conversations are stories. Tell stories. Tell stories that explain who you are as an organization. Stories that the customer would understand and appreciate. Okay. What you have to do in the brand conversation is practice not talking about products. Because as soon as you wander off into a product conversation, you're no longer talking about brand. You're asking the customer to quit considering your brand and start contemplating a binary decision about a product. And that's not what we want to do at this level. And once we've engaged them in that brand conversation and we have them nodding at the right times, then we can certainly talk about exploring needs. Okay, so you can use your data as a marketing tool. We can bring, they can talk about a problem that they're having or a challenge that they're seeing, and I can be armed with data that might be helpful for them to consider in their particular case. I need to know about market trends. I need to be able to introduce those into the conversation. I need to share theories and conclusions. A good business development person is going to challenge the thinking of the person across from them. It's not just to get them to like you. Okay, this is not about creating a friendship. This is about developing respect and leveraging credibility. Share theories and conclusions. Take a stand on things. Take a side on things. Market leaders take sides on issues, and that will command respect. And while it's not what every buyer is looking for, the people who buy on the right-hand side of your accelerant curve do respect people who know what they're talking about and are willing to stand up for it. And if you're connecting your customers' needs and pains back to your brand and outcomes, and they see the interconnect with the challenges that they have with the stories that you're telling, then you've accomplished your goal of embedding the brand conversation into their thinking. So I've talked a little bit about marketing, and there's lots of different marketing strategies, and that is a strategy for getting in front of RFPs for an outcome selling proposition. You may have other propositions in what you do. For instance, if you are a rental-based business or a product sales business and you're basically renting or selling boxes, in other words, you are inherently transactional. There's nothing wrong with that, but you need a different kind of marketing strategy than somebody who's selling outcomes. Right? So look at your organization this way. Here's another diagnostic tool that I use. If I have a company whose primary focus is on an existing type of customer, in other words, they know exactly who their customer is, they know what they look like, they know where they live, they don't need to deviate from that type of customer, and they know exactly what products they want to offer them or services they want to offer them, then I'm really dealing with a market penetration strategy. I just need more of the right type of buyer to know who we are and present them with the existing product. I need minimal brand conversation. I need brand, but I need minimal brand conversation. I need to just talk to more people. I need to get my message out to more people. It's market penetration. However, if I have that same customer base, but I'm constantly trying to introduce new products, then I need a product development marketing strategy, which is a little bit different. We start adding elements of the accelerant curve in product development to pull people down into the curve and get them asking for more things. Effectively, I'm going to use a deeper and wider strategy to go into organizations so that I can show them more of my products. If I want to keep selling the existing products, but I want to find more customers to buy that product, and this is very typical in companies that are seasonal. Say, for instance, you've got the typical AV rental season where you have 6 good months and 6 bad ones, or 4 bad ones and 2 really horrible ones, then I might have a market development strategy where I can find people who buy what I do in those other months. So I'm looking for a new type of customer. So that becomes a market development strategy. But if I'm open to all different kinds of customers and I can constantly add new products, then I have a diversification strategy. So these are all effective strategies, but they use different tools to get there. So the top half of the chart uses business development as an engagement tool. So if I want to do a market development or diversification strategy, I have to have a business development interface. I have to get out there to have branding conversations and work on converting people to buyers before there's a transaction, before there's an RFP. If I'm on the bottom half of this chart, I can use account management. Account management is going to help me with market penetration. Account management is going to help me go deeper and wider into an organization. So the type of sales interface that I use or the marketing interface that I use will depend on which marketing strategy I'm trying to use. Now, there's two types of marketing. There's push marketing and pull marketing. Push marketing is I'm going to shove specific information out there and get the client to react to it. And pull marketing, I'm going to do something attractive to get them to make the first move, to make that choice. So what kind of business you're in and what you're trying to do will tell you what kind of marketing strategy that you need. The mistake I often see people do is they try and use a diversification strategy and be attractive and use business development. But what they're really trying to do is a market penetration strategy where they just need more market share for something that's very, very well defined. All right, transition to selling outcomes. So let's talk about what outcomes are. So if you're in the business now that you're fairly transactional and you really like to be in the outcome selling space, then you need to understand what outcomes are and how they're different from transactions. So outcomes have value while products have prices. And that's the first thing that we learn. That's the first thing that we can identify. If this is a price and it's a binary choice, I buy it or I don't buy it for the price, then it's probably a product. If the value to the customer is only manifest in their terms and what it does for them, then it might be an outcome. It has a value, and it's going to vary from. You can do the exact same thing for two different customers, and it will have different value for them. The question is, did you get to charge for the value that it meant to that customer? So value is derived when the end result is more important than the plan. Where I'm going is more important than how I got there. So that's an outcome-based project. A value-based project is the end result is more important than how you got there. So the question you should ask yourself are, what are the outcomes that your customers need? And the story I've told for years, that many of you have heard me talk about, is selling sound systems, is that, I learned how to sell sound systems instead of by the number of boxes it took or how many SPLs it was pushed out. I simply sold boxes by the outcome of how many people were going to be able to comfortably hear and hear well in the audience. So I sold sound systems based on audience size and intelligibility. Those are outcomes rather than how I was going to get it, which is how many speakers we were going to hang on the ceiling. So push selling is additive. Product plus margin plus value add is push selling. So margin is the maximum to which the customer is indifferent. So when you're looking at the cost of something and you're adding a margin to it so that you can create a price, okay, you're pushing something out there, and the amount of margin you're allowed to add is determined by the marketplace, and what you can add is the amount the customer is indifferent to. When they start caring, you can't add anymore. So value add is something that's worth paying more for. The things that you do for free aren't value add because the client wouldn't pay more for them, which is why you do them for free. So value add means free, but value add should be something that's worth paying more for. So marketing is the art of selling value add first. Many of you will tell me that you are 10% better than any of your competitors, yet you feel compelled to match your competitor's price. If you are indeed 10% better than your competitors, you should charge 10% more. Marketing creates the assumption that you are worth 10% more, therefore anything you quote will be 10% above what a competitor would quote. And when you come at the same price, it tells the customer one of two things. It says, one, you're not as good as you say you were because you don't charge for it, or two, the competitor is better than they said they were. All right. So pull selling is an attractive process. So if I'm going to pull, the value is defined by the buyer and fulfilled by the seller. So it starts with understanding the client's conditions, drivers, and needs. All right. Value pull has to fulfill an intellectual need, and you have to create pull with each customer. So every customer defines what's pulling them in differently. That's why the accelerant curve is so valuable for understanding how I'm going to go to market, because I don't know which thing it is going to make the difference with that buyer. I don't know what they're going to determine is the most valuable thing for them. Now, my example for this is a fine dining business dinner. I love to tell the story about, I love going to Capitol Grills, particularly the one in Orlando, and the one in Vegas is great as well. where I can sit down with a business dinner, and I've hosted many business dinners at these venues, and pull my waiter aside and say, see these people here? These are all my clients or potential clients, and I want them to think that they've been dining incorrectly all their lives. Give them an experience that they didn't know that you could get at a restaurant. And that works 100% of the time. Now, some waiters do it better than others, but the fact is, they understanding what my need is that my audience is going to be extremely pleased that they had a wonderful dinner that was painless and seamless to them about how it happened. Now, competitive advantage, quick word on that. Competing for transactions is a marketing challenge to drive push. And there are times when we do need to compete for transactions. If you're in the bottom left-hand part of the quadrant and you need to increase market share, of course you're going to compete for transaction. And sales becomes an extension of marketing. Selling outcomes works best with pull techniques, as I showed you on that chart, and marketing and sales supports business development in that process. And business development ultimately takes the lead in outcomes selling because the client has to buy into the premise of the outcome before I can turn them over to sales to handle the transactional side of that business, the execution side of that opportunity. All right. So push selling additive. Oh, hey, I did a chart for this. I should have just put that up instead. So push selling is additive. I need to take the parts and pieces, put the value added on there, create some margin. But pull selling is attractive. The client's going to share the value with you. They're going to give you, we've heard the stories about the restaurants that say, pay what you want. And invariably, people pay more than what they would have been charged if you put a price on the menu. That's how pull selling works. That's how outcome-based relationships work. That's how most of my business works. As I sell the outcome, I sell the value to the customer, not the value to me. And stories are very important out of this. So for every outcome that you have in your brand and your brand story, the brand trifecta, that's another lesson I should have probably fit into this webinar. You need a story that supports all of that. And you need brand stories that reinforce the outcomes that you're trying to describe and you're trying to sell. All of these are part of how you get in front of the RFP. Now, you still have to market. You still have to have business development. You still have to engage people. But if you can't engage the customer, you'll never get in the RFP. And you have nothing to lose, of course, by trying. And trying is what this is all about. Now, to go back to the question that was asked earlier in the event about, I think it says, in a case where there's an RFP, you find it better to focus on how your company would adhere to their company association objectives to separate yourself. Look, sometimes you're going to get an RFP and it's just an RFP and you just have to deal with it. Now, I've done webinars on how you can process an RFP differently, how you can create engagement where there is none. But if all else fails, take the proposal opportunity to redirect the focus on brand. If you have somebody who's decided that you just need to be commoditized for whatever reason, they didn't do their market research, they won't engage, they're just jerks, and they have an RFP, and you don't want to waste the opportunity, but you also don't want to succumb to their game and just be another bidder that's helping somebody else win the job because you created some pricing. Go in with take that RFP, do a proposal with the expectation that you will be the high bidder. But make your proposal all about the brand and the outcomes and not about what the RFP said. In other words, be the high bidder and make that buyer wonder what it is that they don't know. Two bids get talked about and I sit in a lot of bid meetings where bids are reviewed. The two bids that get the most discussion are the highest bid and the lowest bid. The lowest bid is they're going to pick on it and figure out why it's so bad and what they didn't get, and we just all feel superior to the low bidder. The high bid is like, what is it that they don't know? Or what is it that they read? Or what is it we left out? Or, they start wondering, somebody who gives me a really high bid, I wonder what it is that they know that I missed. So they may be wrong, but at least they get the discussion. And the other thing you can do, and again, this is next month's webinar, is find a need or value the buyer didn't expect or consider. Look at that RFP and find the opportunities that they've missed, that they have overlooked, and put that in there, throw it up against the wall and see what happens. So I love to get an occasional RFP where it's not clear what the customer wants. I love getting RFPs where they're trying to commoditize us so that we have an opportunity to do something interesting in response. So, wow, this has gone fast. So you're going to have to post some more questions in the box. I'm going to ramble on about some other things for a minute, and I'd love to answer more of your questions, and I've got a couple that are popping up already, so thank you for that. Next month's webinar is on the thing that I just talked about. It's ideation and outcome-based selling. It's the process that you go through when you're taking an RFP and you want to create something phenomenal in your response. You want to impress the client. You want to think outside the box on their behalf. You want to bring great value to the table. Here's the process that we're used to do that. And if we use this process, and we can use it on anything that we do, it doesn't have to be on special occasions only. It's not just for dress up. You can use this ideation and outcome-based selling process with any kind of a project and convert anything into an outcome. Now, it doesn't always work. Okay, sometimes it was the wrong choice, but very often we can take a customer who came in as a commoditized buyer or a very uncreative buyer and then realize that they're finally dealing with somebody who gets it, who took the time to understand my needs and is making suggestions I'd never considered before, and will give you an even better business development opportunity because of it. So one of my favorite webinars, I look forward to giving that one again. Of course, I will update it because I learn stuff all the time from you guys about how to make this better. Jumpstart workshops, yep, get the plug in there. That's on my accelerant curve. It's a chance to have some FaceTime with me, get some concentrated learning. Think about 8 webinars in a row. That's kind of what a workshop is like. Lots of live Q&A, lots of sharing, lots of great networking. We actually have a lot of fun. The next one is in August, August 7th and 8th. It'll be on marketing and business development. You can learn more about them by going to our website and find the Jumpstart page or the workshop page. Make sure you're on the mailing list if you're not. Wonderful thing about marketing, and I spend a lot of time marketing, is how mailing lists grow. My mailing list in the past 6 months through marketing webinars and lead capture has grown 25%, which is phenomenal. I can't wait to tell my marketing firm how successful they're being with their efforts, but it does make a difference. So make sure you're on my mailing list. Go to my website, click on the lead magnet for my free ebook, Learning to Expect Better, sign up, and bam, you're on the mailing list. So if you were sent this webinar and you're not a subscriber, do get subscribed. Here's the book you'll get. I will send you the e-copy of it. Hey, if you want a hardback copy of it, send me a nice note. Maybe I'll package one up and send it to you. Oh, yes. And intentional success. You'll get my Monday morning newsletter. Often some very good stuff. Sometimes I share some videos. A good jolt of common sense thinking every Monday morning. What a great way to start the week. And of course, on my website, there's always the free introductory conversation. Just click on the link. Love to have conversations. People will tell you I'm very generous with my time. If you schedule a call with me for 20 minutes, I'll be on that call until you've gotten your questions answered. I do enjoy that part of this. So I love meeting new people. I love chatting with your folks, and don't hesitate to do that. And once again, shout out to the sponsors. Thanks, you guys. You're awesome. Sure appreciate you. And let's get back to some questions with a little bit of time that we have left. All right. Attendee question here says, how do we set ourselves apart when the RFP is competing with and the buyer's EPTP domain is being bid to equal? Okay, so this is an apples to oranges question. How do we set ourselves apart when the RFP is competing with bid being bid to equal? All right, so I'm a little confused. If you can clarify that question, but I'll answer the question that I think you're asking. Sometimes we respond and the client thinks they're getting apples to apples and that these two suppliers are saying the exact same thing and they don't see the differences in it. And that's frustrating for us. And we're having a follow-up conversation with the client, and they go, well, we can get this from this other company. And it's not the same thing. The products and solutions they're putting in there aren't doing the same things. So if you're not equal AV companies, great. So if the bids are not equal, that's a branding and presentation and proposal thing. So we can write a proposal that very clearly states what we're doing, not how we're doing it, and you'll have a much better job of differentiating yourself. When it comes to differentiating between two AV companies, and the buyer doesn't see the difference between, brand X, who we all know are a bunch of drunken trunk slammers who don't know what they're doing, because that's what brand X always is, and us, who are great, wonderful people, and we know exactly what we're doing, and they don't see the difference. That's a marketing problem. That's marketing and branding problem. If you've gotten to the proposal phase and you've responded to an RFP, or somebody else is on the bid list who shouldn't be on it, in your opinion, then either your marketing's bad or theirs is really good. My suspicion is that your marketing is not adequate and somebody's lumped you in there. Now, also consider that some RFPs are courtesy bids, and they're check bids. Somebody needs to be the low bidder. So maybe that's in a situation where the client has engineered a low bidder on the proposal, on the RFP. So keep that in mind. My general recommendation, though, is quit worrying about the competition. Don't worry about who the other guy is. Don't worry about what the client thinks they are. Worry about what the client thinks you are, because that's what's important and that's what you have control over. So put more energy back into making yourself well represented, and spend less time worrying about what they think of other people, and you will have more success, I promise that. Another question here. In the event that the RFP is extremely specific, model number, blah, 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 is there anything you can do to set yourself apart from every other company? Yes, the one thing you could do is not respond to it the same way as everybody else, and that will set you apart. Very often, though, a very specific RFP is coming from a control buyer. They want to be the expert. You're not the expert. They are. That's why they wrote the detailed RFP, or we engaged a design consultant or something like that. It's how you play in that game. My recommendation is, if that's not the game you want to play, if that's not the kind of RFP you want to respond to, one, don't respond to them. Okay. Use that as an engagement opportunity to go back to that potential buyer and say, hey, we would love to do some business with you, but clearly you don't understand who we are yet or what we do. So rather than respond to this RFP, can I find out when you have time in the near future so I can actually introduce you to our company? And then maybe one day there'll be an RFP that's exactly what you need to send to us. And that would be a much better use of both of our time. So go back, double back on that. But responding to an RFP that you don't want to do, or it's not the way that you want to do business, is not going to help your cause. You have nothing to lose by going back to the client and saying, hey, we'd like to do business differently. Are you interested in having that conversation? Another question, what percentage of my business should come from responding to RFP versus direct selling based on marketing efforts? Blind RFPs, yeah, if you're getting a lot of blind RFPs and you're responding to them, that can be a problem. Ideally, it depends on what kind of business you're in. So it's kind of an it depends answer. So it depends on what kind of business you're really trying to be in. If we're soliciting RFPs, if that's our marketing plan, then why shouldn't all of that be from RFPs? And I can set up a business that can profitably run responding to RFPs. So unfortunately, that's a very convoluted way of saying I don't have an answer for you, because there is not a right number. It's directly tied to what kind of business are you trying to be in. And then that would probably give me a few more clues about how maybe possibly to answer your question. But feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to schedule an introductory phone call. I'd love to process that question with you. I think that's great. I'm going to take this last question, even though we're running over here, but I think it's an important question, and I know many of you want to hear it answered. A good 90% of business is lost because going against in-house is lost to the in-house business because the in-house is going to save them money on internet. How do you approach that? All right. So the phenomenon that's happening is you're bidding against in-house AV, you're the outside AV provider, and when things start to get negotiating, all of a sudden the proposal from the hotel changes, and the AV's price hasn't changed, but all of a sudden the internet is free. So in other words, they've moved some money around. It's the same cost. How do you approach that? You need to help the client stop doing straight line math, or you need to have an internet tool that you can bring in, provide them internet outside of the hotel system that's better and faster. So the fact is, the in-house AV companies have a relationship with the hotel, which gives them the leverage to do that. We know that the cost of internet in the hotel is dramatically inflated. It's way above its value. And we can certainly point that out to our buyers, is that they took something that they were charging you $15,000 for that was worth $100, and now they're charging you $500 for it, and you're happier. Why? But we can also have better tools in being way more valuable than in-house AV. And the fact is, all things being equal, if you're better, why wouldn't the customer hire you? And that's the question you really should be asking. So I could probably do a whole webinar on battling in-house AV, but then I would have to turn around and do a webinar on helping AV people keep third-party AV suppliers out of their hotel. And that would certainly be fair, wouldn't it? So anyway, thank you guys very much for all your questions and for participation. Quick recap, RFPs, you're starting the conversation too late if you're waiting on the RFP. Marketing pushes you in front of more prospects. Lead generation finds and pulls in brand buyers. Brand conversations develop relationships. They develop credibility. They identify need so that then you can create and present value to the buyer. Talk about fulfilling outcomes instead of transacting products. Change that whole culture inside of your organization. Be great. And you can't hide from branding and marketing anymore. If you're not spending a great deal of energy on branding and marketing, then you're missing huge, huge opportunities in our industry. Other people are going to market in front of you. Other people are going to get their messages out. The only loser in all of that is you. So get on board with the branding and marketing. It's an investment you can't afford to bypass anymore. So there you go. Hope that was valuable for you. Please email me more questions. Look for the email tomorrow so you can watch the archive and share it with your friends. And I will see you on next month's webinar on ideation and outcome-based selling. Thanks. Have a good one. Bye.